I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. And today is 4th of July, so I have a fun soundtrack from all the parties that are going on around me. Since this is the day that we celebrate that brief moment in time between when colonists won back their right to create their own sovereign currency, and before they found out that that was just a joke. So today we're going to look at federal equals imperial and why also empires are a form of toxic masculinity. Let's do this. In an article that I cite from Matt Ehret, he states, as early as 1729, Franklin codified a system of banking tied not to the worship of money or markets, but rather internal improvements, which argued for the creation of colonial scrip, not controlled by private central bankers. These insights preceded the later work by his protege Alexander Hamilton, who established the American system of political economy. Now, Matt and I have gone back and forth on this issue several times, and he sees Franklin's and Hamilton's economic systems as being two parts of the same thing. I commented that Franklin did establish colonial scrip, not just argue for it, but Hamilton destroyed the hopes of bringing it back, which the Revolutionary War had been fought for. So I wrote, in following Franklin's example, we should be designing land-backed money for local exchange and debts, issued and controlled by commonwealths around 200,000 people, which he called colonial scrip. Or should we be promoting a global form of money backed by precious metals, called species, so that local governments are forbidden to use any other form of credit or currency for local exchange and debts? This is Hamilton's system that repaid the debts to France and his mentor, Robert Morris, by foreclosing on the farms of Revolutionary War veterans for unpaid taxes while not allowing them to issue back wages for their war service in a local economy. This is the system that destroyed the sovereign people of Appalachia, my birth home, by giving hundreds of thousands of acres free to Robert Morris, of land that they'd established as homesteads and cultivated. You say Franklin argued for a colonial scrip, but that's misleading. He was the leading designer and advocate of the scrip that made Philadelphia a model of success. So much that when he argued to export the model to Europe, dismayed by the poverty in Ireland, the merchants passed the Currency Act forbidding it. That and not taxes was the cause of the American Revolution, according to him. And after the war was won, your hero Hamilton worked with the merchants and bankers to reinstate the exact terms of the British Currency Act by forbidding Franklin's system in the Constitution. Whether they were in thrall to American bankers like Morris or British bankers was the only difference with Hamilton's death. The cause for which they'd fought had already been lost. With respect, Matt, you're rewriting history to promote what you see as the current solution. We can disagree on what the answer is now, but don't destroy Franklin's greatest invention to do it. And so to give some background to this, I'll link at the end my episode, The Constitutional Convention Coup, and in it, I quote from a chapter in my book called The Short Eventful Life of Sovereign Money. And I write, by 1781, Robert Morris stepped into the newly created role of Superintendent of Finance. First, he devalued the Continental, and then extracted $2 million in specie from the states. Finally, he suspended all pay to enlisted soldiers and officers, declaring that they would be paid when a peace treaty was signed. Now remember, that's 1781. The Paris Treaty was signed in 1783 and ratified in 1784, but pay was not forthcoming. Meanwhile, veterans owed back taxes on their farms for the time they had been away fighting. Adding injury to injury, the bankers were rushing tax foreclosures through a complicit court and evicting families from the homes and farms for which they had fought. So in 1783, before the Paris Treaty was even ratified, Alexander Hamilton had already drafted 2,300 words of a new constitution to replace the Articles of Confederation and to make sure that control of money and taxation was centralized. But he withdrew the motion for lack of support. And for 3 more years, the banker-led government withheld 2 years of military pay so they could continue to steal the farms and homesteads. Then, in 1786, Western Massachusetts farmer and veterans, led by Daniel Shays and Luke Day, surrounded the court to stop tax foreclosures. They demanded that an issue of Liberty money be created by the state to pay the back wages promised veterans. A militia was sent to disperse the rebellion, but the militia also consisted of farmers and veterans, who ended up joining the protest. The angry crowd grew to 800 militia and 1,200 protesters before the frightened court finally adjourned without a single foreclosure. Shaken to his core, Samuel Adams drew up the Riot Act, immediately suspending habeas corpus and proposing execution for rebellion. George Washington wrote, "Commotions of this sort, like snowballs, gather strength as they roll if there is no opposition in the way to divide and crumble them." Shays and Day planned to keep the snowball rolling by raiding the federal armory. While they were gathering men, Governor Bowdoin and the Boston merchants put in 6,000 pounds of their own money to hire 3,000 mercenary militiamen from counties in eastern Massachusetts. On the day prior to the planned attack, Luke Day sent Shays a note postponing for 24 hours. Bowdoin's men, however, intercepted the note. When Shays reached the armory, the forewarned militia easily defeated his solitary troops, having fortified the armory's defenses. Seeing the popularity of the resistance, the merchant bankers in the Massachusetts legislature wasted no time in passing the Disqualification Act, barring anyone who had participated in the rebellion from voting or running for office. 4,000 people signed confessions in exchange for amnesty, and the financiers were reimbursed for the expense of the mercenary militia. So that led to the Annapolis meeting, where merchants and bankers embellished Hamilton's draft and overstepped their charter to set up a constitutional convention. There is no greater scoundrel or traitor to the cause of sovereignty for which the Americans fought than Alexander Hamilton. Although Matt didn't respond to my first comment, a reader named William Pritting answered, linking articles on Hamilton, the Bradbury Pound, John Titus, and a YouTube called Mommy, Where Does Money Come From? In an expanded comment, he detailed how he thought national economies should handle home loans, credit cards, car loans, business loans, government agencies, tariffs, and welfare. He also cited an article on how Ben Franklin caused the Revolutionary War, to which I responded, exactly, and linked my book with the chapter on this. William replied, I kind of favor my monetary solution detailed in the reply below. After a cursory look at your book on Amazon, do you think all 8+ billion people can be grouped into units of 200,000 people, with each unit using its own currency or script? I have trouble seeing that become a reality. I answered, does size not matter in your opinion? The point of disagreement is whether Franklin and Hamilton agreed on the size of a sovereign entity that's able to issue its own currency. And it's certainly your prerogative to reject my last decade of researching this based on a cursory reading. But you do understand that for me to abandon everything I've read and thought in favor of some links you're throwing out there would be self-negating. William wrote, "In my humble opinion, I do think you are wasting your life trying to convince people to give up their established, independent, sovereign nation states and regroup into community nations of only 200,000 people." To which I countered, "Ha ha, I will need to quote you on that. Glad that you're humble enough to tell other people that they're wasting their lives based on a few moments that you, from your position of superiority, have spent understanding their life work. I think this fits under my series, Mansplaining Economics. Imagine what you would have said if you weren't so humble." William shot back, "How many people have bought your book and agreed with your proposal, besides the one person from Norway who left an Amazon review? As an informed consumer, the summation on the back cover of your book in no way induces me to want to give you any of my money to read your irrational and nonsensical proposal. You might want to take up knitting or crocheting or finger painting." I rejoined, "Nothing like doubling down, William, just in case anyone thinks I might have been misinterpreting how insulting your statements were from the first. And the decidedly feminine activities you suggest as alternatives is an excellent illustration of your misogyny and disdain for women in masculine realms like economics. I never took your statements personally. How could I when you clearly knew next to nothing about me or my ideas? But it will be useful to show other women the ways in which men dismiss them." And although Matt and I disagree on this point, he did say that my intro was the best example he'd read of Platonic thinking when he and Cynthia got my book. So there are smart people who take what I have to say seriously, even when we disagree. William's final shot was, "Economics is not your forte." Just kidding. He then added for good measure, "No intelligent person is going to take your proposal seriously." So, my non-intelligent and nonsensical friends, I offer this as an unusually clear-cut example that empire thinking goes along with toxic masculinity. In fact, as I've said before, the two are redundant. Toxic masculinity assumes the right to dominate others and tell them what to do, as William did in his model, instructing all the nations of the world in how to run their economies. And he rejects and ridicules the feminine-sized economy centered around the family with a network that is bottom-up or lowercase federal rather than top-down or uppercase federal. Imagine thinking that communities are smart enough to run themselves. And thank you to the particularly irrational T. Jacobson for leaving such a nice review on my book, which William graciously pointed out to me. Don't worry, my sequel will be on finger painting or how to crochet your own dunce cap. So to follow up before you go join your own party, I suggest the Constitution Convention coup, which I think is one of my best for showing that the founders did not have our best interest at heart, and also one Guy reminded me of, Patriarchal Pyramid or Matriarchal Matrix. Thank you for watching.